I've seen a lot of people rush out and grab a cheap, off-the-shelf keyboard because it looks like a bargain, only to discover weeks later that the keys feel dead, the sounds are thin, and the pedals barely register anything. That kind of buyer's regret is why I always pause before hitting add to cart on any stage piano. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. The Nord Piano 6 sits in a different lane. It's not the $300 starter you might find in a big box store, but it also isn't the $4,000 workstation that a touring pro would take on a world tour. It feels like the sort of middle ground that could actually make sense for a gig-playing musician who wants quality without the overhead of a full-blown synth rack. When I first held the Nord Piano 6, the first thing that struck me was the weight of the keybed. It's a full 88-key, triple sensor action, and you can feel the incremental resistance as you play, almost like a real piano. That's a far cry from the rubber key mini keyboards that many beginners start with. The triple sensor means the keys register 3 stages of pressure, which translates into more expressive control over volume and timbre. In a rehearsal room, that sensitivity lets you pull a soft, intimate line in the verses and then punch through a big, resonant chord in the chorus without having to adjust any settings mid-song. The real test for any stage piano is how it behaves under the lights and in the mix. I set up the Nord Piano 6 on a standard gig stand, plugged it into a small PA system, and ran through a set of classic pop ballads, a few jazz standards, and then a synth-heavy electronica piece. The onboard FX, especially the reverb and delay, held up surprisingly well. The reverb didn't get lost in the mix, and the delay synced cleanly with the tempo, which saved me from having to rig an external pedal for timing. For a solo performer, that built-in flexibility can replace a whole rack of outboard gear, saving both stage space and setup time. One practical strength that shows up when you're actually using the piano on stage is the triple pedal assembly. The left pedal acts as a sustain, the middle is a soft pedal, and the right can be assigned to a variety of functions, like a sostenuto or even a VCA-type sustain that behaves differently from a traditional piano damper. In a live setting, I found the ability to switch the right pedal to a hold function for synth patches a game changer. I could press a chord, engage the hold, and then layer a pad underneath without having to manually program a loop. That kind of on-fly control is something cheap alternatives simply don't offer. That said, the Nord Piano 6 isn't without its trade-offs. The display is a modest LCD panel that can be hard to read in bright stage lighting, especially when you're scrolling through program banks quickly. If you're accustomed to a full-color touchscreen, you might feel a little constrained. Also, while the piano does a solid job at emulating acoustic tones, the sample library isn't as expansive as some high-end workstations. If your repertoire leans heavily on rare or heavily layered orchestral patches, you'll probably need an external sound module or a software synth to fill those gaps. The piano's onboard storage holds a decent number of patches, but you'll have to be selective about what you load for each gig. Who should consider buying the Nord Piano 6? If you're a gigging pianist or singer-songwriter who wants a realistic piano feel, reliable pedal response, and enough onboard effects to sound polished without a lot of extra gear, this is a solid match. It also works well for studio musicians who need a tactile keyboard for recording piano parts and want the ability to dial in synth textures without swapping instruments. The price point sits comfortably for those who have outgrown the entry-level market but don't need the sprawling feature set of a flagship workstation. Who might want to skip it? If you're a total beginner on a shoestring budget, the Nord's price could feel steep compared to a basic keyboard that still offers decent sounds for practice. Likewise, if you're a synth-centric producer who lives in a DAW and relies on massive sample libraries, you may find the onboard sounds limiting and prefer a controller that focuses purely on playability, leaving the sound generation to software. Finally, anyone who needs a fully backlit screen for quick program changes in dim venues might look elsewhere, as the Nord's display can be a bit of a hassle under those conditions. From a day-to-day usability standpoint, the piano's weight is something to note. At around 25 kilograms, it isn't something you'll toss into a backpack, but it's manageable for most gigging musicians who have a dedicated road case or a sturdy gig bag. The key action holds up well after hours of playing, and the triple sensors don't start to lag even after a long set. I've also appreciated the relatively straightforward menu navigation once you get the